Inside the Coptic Museum in Cairo, Room 4, a sealed display case holds 13 leather-bound volumes. The largest measures roughly 30 centimeters across. Scholarly access to the complete collection was restricted until 1977. One text inside those volumes names a god that no church council ever put before its congregation. That text is still legible, today, in that room. The Council of Nicaea convened in 325 AD. Texts like these were banned, buried, called heresy. Institutional silence followed. Not for a decade, not for a century, for 1,600 years. Then a farmer, swinging a mattock into the cliffs of Jabal al-Tarif in Upper Egypt in December of 1945, struck a sealed red earthenware jar. What came out of that jar changed the count of early sacred texts permanently. 52 documents emerged. 52 separate records describing a divine architecture that Orthodox religion had spent 16 centuries burying. The thesis those documents carry is not subtle. The God described in the Apocryphon of John, in the Gospel of Thomas, in the hypostasis of the archons, is not the creator God of Genesis. The creator God of Genesis is a subordinate figure. Above him sits something else entirely. Something the texts call the monad. A being so prior, so absolute, so structurally different from any deity you were taught, that the people who read these documents in the 4th century voted to make them disappear. In the next several minutes, you will see exactly what the Apocryphon of John says the monad is, what modern cosmology has independently arrived at using entirely different instruments, and why the precision of that ancient description is not a coincidence that institutional religion has been comfortable discussing. If forbidden sacred history is what keeps you searching, subscribe now. Every week, this channel surfaces what was deliberately removed. The primary source is the Apocryphon of John, held in Nag Hammadi Codex II, currently custodied by the Coptic Museum in Cairo. The translation used here is Marvin Meyer's 2007 edition, published in the Nag Hammadi Scriptures by Harper One, the most comprehensive critical English rendering of the complete library to date. The text opens its description of the monad with a Greek term that carries precise structural weight. Monad. From the Greek monos, meaning alone, singular, undivided. But the Apocryphon of John does not use it as a poetic flourish. It uses it as a technical designation. A monarchy with nothing above it. Not a kingdom with a king. A singularity with no category above it. No prior cause. No containing space. The text states this directly. The monad is inexpressible. It is pure light. It is immeasurable. It existed before the concept of existence had meaning. That last phrase requires a pause, because the author of this text was writing in the 2nd century. He had no quantum physics. He had no theoretical cosmology. He had no framework for describing a state that precedes being itself. Yet the Apocryphon of John does exactly that. It describes the monad as existing before thought, before will, before the first movement of anything toward anything else, before the preconditions for creation were themselves created. This is the impossible knowledge beat that runs through this document like a structural load-bearing wall. The text is not describing a God who existed before the universe. It is describing a state that preceded the categories of existence and non-existence simultaneously. Pre-creation, pre-thought, pre-being itself. The author had no philosophical tradition available to him in 2nd century Alexandria that would have handed him this concept fully formed. Neoplatonic thought was adjacent, but it did not go this far. The monad of Plotinus still participates in emanation. The monad of the Apocryphon of John precedes even the capacity for emanation. Now set that document down for a moment and pick up a different one. In 2003, physicist and philosopher Paul Davies, writing in his work The Mind of God and in subsequent papers on cosmological fine-tuning, described what theoretical physicists call the ground of being, the state from which quantum vacuum fluctuation emerges, a zero-point field. Not empty space, a structured pre-material plenum that precedes the distinction between something and nothing. A state that is not void, because void is still a category. This is not metaphor in contemporary physics. This is the working model. The quantum vacuum state is the closest empirical framework modern science has produced for describing a condition prior to material instantiation. The Apocryphon of John, written in the 2nd century, translated from Coptic into Greek, preserved in a sealed jar for 1600 years, calls the monad immeasurable light, not a being who produces light, not a being who dwells in light. The monad is the light, structurally, ontologically, without boundary or container. The text is explicit. This is not metaphor. This is literal recorded testimony from a tradition that was voted out of existence at Nicaea and then physically buried in Upper Egypt. The century bridge lands here. The ancients called it the monad, immeasurable and pre-existent. Physicists call it the quantum vacuum ground state, the zero-point plenum. Same underlying structure, 18 centuries apart. And what this light produced next, the first movement outward from that absolute singularity, is where the architecture of this cosmology becomes genuinely terrifying. Now we move into the architecture itself. The Gospel of the Egyptians, Nag Hammadi Codex III, housed at the Coptic Museum in Cairo, translated by Frederick Wyss in 1977. This is not a peripheral document. It is one of the most structurally detailed cosmological texts recovered from the Nag Hammadi library. And what it describes in its opening sequence is a system so precise it reads like a technical diagram rather than a myth. The text introduces the pleroma. In Coptic, the word is pleroma. It does not mean heaven. It does not mean paradise. Pleroma means fullness, totality, a condition of complete saturation. Every possible expression of consciousness existing simultaneously in a single boundless field. The monad does not inhabit the pleroma. The monad generates it, the way a fire generates heat, the way a mind generates thought. The pleroma is what divine consciousness looks like when it radiates outward from its own absolute center. And then the text does something remarkable. It enumerates 12 eons, emanating from the monad in paired bursts of light. Not randomly, not chaotically, in sequence. Each pairing produces the next. Each emanation carries a portion of the original consciousness outward, like rings expanding from a single point of impact on still water. The text describes this with a precision that should not be possible for a document composed roughly 1800 years ago. The author is not speculating. The author is recording. There is a difference, and that difference matters enormously. Here is where the impossible knowledge beat lands. In 1980, theoretical physicist David Bohm published Wholeness and the Implicate Order. Bohm had spent decades working at the edge of quantum mechanics, and what he arrived at was a model of reality structured around two interlocking orders. The explicate order, the world we perceive, with separate objects, measurable distances, discrete events. And the implicate order, a deeper enfolded layer of reality in which everything is already connected, already whole, already present. In Bohm's model, what we call particles, what we call matter, what we call consciousness, are all local expressions of a single underlying field that enfolds everything simultaneously. Localized eruptions of a total fullness. Pleroma, fullness. David Bohm had no access to the Nag Hammadi texts. He was a physicist, working from quantum data, from laboratory results, from mathematical inference. He was not reading Coptic manuscripts in the Cairo Museum. Yet the architecture he arrived at, a boundless, enfolded field of total potential from which localized expressions emerge in sequence, mirrors the structure described in the Gospel of the Egyptians with a precision that cannot be dismissed as coincidence. The Gnostic author named the field. Bohm named the field. 18 centuries apart, same underlying structure, same directionality, the many emerging from the one, each carrying the signature of the source. And the text goes further than Bohm did. It doesn't just describe the emanation. It records the 12 aeons not as abstract forces, but as paired, conscious expressions. Light generating light, each pairing a kind of resonance between complementary aspects of the original fullness. The monad does not create the way a craftsman builds a table. The monad radiates the way a sun radiates. The aeons are not manufactured, they are expressed, and they remain, by their nature, connected to the source that produced them. This is a cosmology of participation, not production, of consciousness unfolding, not matter being assembled, and it is sitting in a codex that spent 16 centuries buried in an Egyptian cliff face. But the text doesn't stop at emanation. It records the moment the system broke. The break has a name: On the Origin of the World. Nag Hammadi Codex II, translated by Bentley Leighton in 1987. This text is one of the most confrontational documents in the entire Nag Hammadi library. It does not ease into its claims. It names the problem directly, and the name it uses has been waiting inside that codex for 16 centuries. Yaldabaoth. In Coptic, the name carries layered meaning. Scholars of the tradition read it as child of chaos. Some render it as offspring of the void. The text itself calls him the blind god, a being who emerged from a rupture in the pleroma, who looked out at the darkness around him and, seeing nothing above him, concluded he was alone, concluded he was supreme, concluded he was the only thing that existed. And then he said so. The text records his exact declaration, word for word. He announces, "I am a jealous God, and there is no other beside me." That sentence will sound familiar. It should. That phrase appears verbatim in Exodus, the 20th chapter, the 5th verse. Same declaration, same possessiveness, same insistence on singular supremacy. But in the Gnostic text, the speaker is not the highest divine reality. He is a derivative being, a localized rupture, a consciousness that formed in ignorance and then proclaimed that ignorance as law. The Gnostic author identified the biblical creator as a lower being. Let the weight of that settle. Not a different God, the same figure, the same declaration, placed in a completely different position in the cosmological hierarchy. Not the monad, not the pleroma, a being who formed below the fullness and had no awareness of what existed above him. He was not lying. He believed it. That is precisely what the text means by blind. His blindness was not moral. It was structural. He could not perceive the light above because he had not originated from it directly. He had emerged from a rupture in the lower edge of the pleroma, and the light of the monad did not reach him. This is the impossible knowledge beat. The Gnostic author made this identification roughly 1800 years before the field of comparative religion formally developed the tools to examine multiple religious traditions side by side. Before scholars like Karen Armstrong or Elaine Pagels had the academic frameworks to analyze competing theological claims within overlapping textual traditions. The author of On the Origin of the World looked at the biblical creator's own words and placed him inside a cosmological structure that subordinated him. Not through argument, through architecture. through a map of where that declaration comes from and what it reveals about the speaker. The century bridge is exact. Comparative religion as a formal discipline is roughly 150 years old. This text is roughly 1800 years old. The analysis arrived first. The methodology came later. And Yaldabaoth did not stop at declaration. The text records what he built next: a cosmos, a material structure, a world assembled from the elements below the pleroma, shaped according to his own incomplete understanding of reality. He was building from a blueprint he did not fully possess, in a darkness he could not fully perceive. And this is where it gets disturbing, because the text says he did not build it empty. Something was placed inside it. The Apocryphon of John, Section 25, Codex 2, translated by Marvin Meyer in 2007. This is the Pneuma passage, one of the most precise and most unsettling sequences in the entire Gnostic corpus. And the word at its center is one you need to hold carefully: pneuma. In Coptic, and before that in Greek, pneuma means breath, but not ordinary breath, not the air that fills lungs. In this context, pneuma is the breath spark of the monad itself, a fragment of the original divine consciousness sealed inside physical matter. Not metaphorically, the text is not being poetic. It is describing a mechanism. Yaldabaoth builds the physical cosmos. He assembles the material world from the elements available to him below the pleroma: darkness, matter, ignorance. He is constructing a structure. What the Apocryphon of John records is that in the act of constructing it, he inadvertently sealed something inside it: a spark, the pneuma, a fragment of the monad's own light, embedded in the human body without Yaldabaoth's full understanding of what he had placed there. He built the prison. He did not know he had seated it with the key. This is the impossible knowledge beat, and it is precise. In 2019, philosopher and cognitive scientist Bernardo Kastrup published his formal framework of analytic idealism in the journal Philosophies, later expanded in his book, The Idea of the World. Kastrup's central argument is that consciousness is the fundamental substrate of reality, and that what we experience as separate individual minds are dissociated alters of a single universal mind. His term is exact: dissociated alters. Localized, bounded expressions of one total consciousness that have lost direct awareness of their source, yet remain constituted by it entirely. Map that onto the Gnostic pneuma passage. The monad's spark, sealed inside material form, experiencing itself as separate, bounded, unaware of its origin, a dissociated alter of universal mind. Kastrup arrived at this model through philosophy of mind, through neuroscience, through the hard problem of consciousness, the stubborn fact that no physical process has ever been shown to produce subjective experience. He was not reading Coptic manuscripts. He was following the logic of consciousness research to its necessary conclusion. The Gnostic author recorded that conclusion 18 centuries earlier. The Century Bridge. Analytic idealism as a formal philosophical position is approximately 30 years old in its current form. The pneuma passage is roughly 1800 years old. The model came first. The terminology arrived later. Same structure, same architecture, same identification of the individual human consciousness as a localized expression of a single total source, embedded in matter and unaware of what it carries. But here is what the Apocryphon of John does not leave ambiguous. The pneuma is not a mistake. It is not an accident of the construction process. The text states it plainly. The monad's spark is still inside. It was always inside. And the text identifies that spark not as a passive remnant, but as the operative principle of return. The exit was built into the prison at the moment of construction. The question the text raises, The question it leaves open like a wound is whether the spark knows what it is. And that question leads directly to what the next layer of evidence reveals. Codex 2 sits in Cairo's Coptic Museum right now. Photographed, digitized, every word in this episode traceable to Marvin Meyer's 2007 anthology. Publicly available, publicly checkable. The monad described in those pages carries no name, no gender, no beginning. That description predates every institutional image of God by at least 300 years. And the mechanism it describes is still running. A hidden spark inside matter, oriented toward a silent source it cannot name and has never seen. Not a metaphor, a structural claim. Written down, preserved, sitting in a glass case in Cairo, waiting for the next person who looks closely enough to ask what it means. If this hidden history moves something in you, leave a thought below and subscribe. The archive goes deeper every week.